It being 2 o'clock, we now move to question time, and I'll call Senator Payne.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, how many funds, subject to Labor's doubling of the super tax, are self-managed super funds?
Very good question. Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Payne for the question. I'm not sure I have the exact number with me. I will come back to the Senate with it, but as I've said a number of times this week, we expect the very modest change that we have made, that we have announced in relation to lowering the concessional rate for tax concessions for balances over $3 million, will affect around 80,000 individuals when it comes into effect, and of that, there is certainly a proportion of that which are self-managed super funds. I'll see if I can find the exact number for Senator Payne during question time today.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Payne, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Minister, can you categorically rule out any further changes by this government in this parliament to the taxation or regulation of self-managed super funds?
Minister.
Thank you. Well, the government's made clear that this is the only change to superannuation taxation during this term, and this change won't actually come into effect until after the next election, which is something those opposite who are dying in the ditch on this issue don't take into account. We have made a very modest change. I've already answered the question,
Gallagher,
Senator Birmingham,
please,
if you were listening.
Minister Gallagher, please resume. Order. Order. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, President. Point of order on reference, and I've been attempting to listen carefully to Senator Gallagher and her response to what is a prospective question about the government ruling out any further changes appears to be hinging on the change they are currently making. I invite you to draw Senator Gallagher to the question about the government clearly ruling out any further changes affecting self-managed superannuation funds.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I have been listening, and I believe that the minister is being relevant, and I'll invite her to continue.
If you had listened, I had said very clearly. If you'd listened, I said very clearly that the government has made it clear that this is the only change to superannuation taxation arrangements that we are making this term, and this one won't come into effect until after the next election. We have been clear about that. This is a very modest change to a very small number of people who are fortunate enough to have $3 million in their superannuation
Thank you, Minister.
account.
Your time for answering has expired. Senator Payne, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Minister, having now broken Mr Albanese's election promise to not change taxes on superannuation and launched an assault targeted at self-managed superannuation funds, why should any Australian trust Labor not to further hike taxes or undermine choice in superannuation?
Minister.
Thank you very much. We are upfront about the challenges we've inherited. We have made a very modest change to a small number of people with superannuation balances in excess of $3 million. The average superannuation balance on International Women's Day in this country for women is $140,000. $140,000. Women retire with less savings in their super. They have less assets. They earn
Gallagher,
less.
please resume your seat. Minister, please resume your seat. I'm waiting for quiet on my left. Minister, please continue.
I've finished my
I'm just going to go to Senator Wong, who needs to advise of some ministerial arrangements. Senator
Yes,
Wong.
I apologise. I was so taken away with saying happy birthday to Murray Coleman, I forgot to actually give the statement by leave concerning ministerial arrangements. So I seek leave to make a statement concerning ministerial arrangements.
Leave's granted.
Thank you.
Leave is granted.
I advised changes to ministerial arrangements that Senator Farrell will be absent from question time today and tomorrow on account of ministerial business overseas, and in his absence, ministers will represent portfolios in accordance with a letter that has been circulated to the President, party leaders and independent senators.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Just while we've got this break, I draw to the attention of honourable senators the presence in the gallery of a parliamentary delegation from Mongolia, led by Mongolia's Minister for Education and Science, His Excellency Inkam Galan, and the Ambassador of Mongolia to Australia, His Excellency Dava Seren, and the Mongolian delegation. On behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and in particular the Senate. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. On International Women's Day, we look at how far we've come and where we're heading. Can the Minister outline what's next on the Albanese government's agenda for women?
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question and for her long-standing work in supporting women, particularly those on low incomes in this country over many, many years. And I would, on International Women's Day, also like to associate myself with the other comments and remarks made about Marie Coleman, who I acknowledge in the chamber today, who seems to have been a mentor and someone many of us have looked up to in this place. And it's a real privilege for me to be here as Minister for Women in a government that's pursuing many of the issues that Marie and her colleagues have campaigned for many years. And this is a government that puts women at the centre. I acknowledge all the women colleagues in this place and all the women parliamentarians who have come before us. Over the years, Australia has made great progress advancing the status of women, but in a number of areas, progress is slowing or stalled. This government is working hard to put us on the path to achieving a better future for women in Australia. We're developing a national strategy to achieve gender equality, to help make Australia one of the best countries in the world for equality between men and women. And this government is listening to women. We don't want to guess what life is like for women of all backgrounds. We want to know and listen and hear from them. Today we launched public consultation on the strategy, including a survey and other materials to support individuals, communities and organisations to contribute to that strategy. We want to hear from Australians from all walks of life, especially women and girls, about what it's like in the areas of care, work, economic security, safety, health and beyond. We want this to be a national and respectful conversation, and today I've written to all my colleagues in this place to invite you to be part of this important national discussion in your electorates and in your communities.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Can the Minister outline what the government has already achieved for women since being elected last May?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question. We've been delivering on our commitments we took to the last election since coming to government in May 2022 through policies like investments in our cheaper childcare, 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave, boosting and expanding the paid parental leave, gender-responsive budgeting in the first budget in nearly a decade that casts a gendered lens over the budget, the National Plan, signing off the National Plan with states and territories to end violence against women and children with a record $1.7 billion to implement the plan, supporting a wage increase for aged care workers, where over 90% of workers are women. We've also, my colleague in the other place, has established a National Women's Health Advisory Council to improve our health system and how it responds to women and girls. We've got funding and legislation to implement all 55 recommendations of the Respect at Work report, and we've introduced a bill to close the gender pay gap.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. We know that some women experience greater inequality. Can the Minister update us on how the government is ensuring no women are left behind?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the supplementary. We know that some women face additional barriers that intersect with and compound their experience of gender inequality. The consultation launched today seeks feedback from all women, and we're committed to shining a light on where we need to improve and where we need better data. The report card, which has also been released today, is a step forward in that. We will be doing that every year, and we will be held to account and measuring our progress through that. We're working in partnership with First Nations communities to develop an action plan, as well as a standalone First Nations plan on family violence. This will build on the $424 million in additional funding for the Closing the Gap implementation plan, which was committed last month. And there were also additional investments in the October budget directly to support First Nations people and First Nations women, and enshrining a voice to Parliament will help ensure that First Nations women's voices are raised and heard on the policies that affect them and their communities.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Chandler.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. How should Australian companies pay franked dividends during periods when they are raising capital under the government's franking reforms?
Minister.
The question on everyone's lips out there.
This is another one that the opposition are opposed to. We inherited a budget. We inherited a budget with a $50 billion structural deficit, with pressures coming to us, $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt that had doubled before the pandemic hit. This is the budget we inherited, and all of the very modest changes that we're doing, including closing some tax loopholes and protecting the integrity of the tax system through the changes we're making to frank dividends, even that you are opposed to, something that raises a very modest $200 million when implemented. Again, the no-alition with their head in the sand. They don't want to pay for anything. They don't want budget repair. They don't want to fix the energy crisis. They don't want to support energy power bill reliefs. They don't want to support housing for women. They don't want to support Aussie jobs.
Your seat. Senator Chandler.
President, the point of order is relevance. It was a very specific question. The Minister has been responding for 1 minute and 2 seconds, and I would like her to be relevant to the question that I asked.
Thank you. The Minister is being relevant, and I'll listen to make sure the rest of the question is answered. Senator Wong, are you seeking a point?
You've ruled, so I don't need to make.
Minister Gallagher.
Well, the changes to franking dividends. The changing to franking credits through the off-market share buybacks arrangement and the capital raising measure, which you guys actually announced and never implemented. Another one, raise it, put it in there, never do it, to ensure the integrity of the tax system and to close off loopholes. It's a reasonable, rational, measured response that assists very small with budget repair. Well, you are opposed to it. Okay, so we will continue on without you. $200 million it raises.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
President, this was quite a precise question with a direct point made by Senator Chandler asking about how Australian companies will pay franking dividends during periods they are raising capital. I would ask you to invite the Minister, in the interest of direct relevance, to turn to the issue of companies raising capital under these reforms and how they are impacted.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Senator Wong.
Well, the Minister is actually discussing the very policy reform that Senator Chandler asked about. So I'd submit to you that is clearly directly relevant.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Order. Order. I do believe that the Minister is being relevant, so I invite her to continue. Minister.
Well, I've answered the question, and those I have. It's the off-market share buyback arrangement.
Please resume your seat. Minister, I've asked you to resume your seat. I'm asking for order, particularly on my left. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. The measure will align off-market share buybacks with on-market share buybacks, which I think is a sensible, rational tax integrity measure that raises a very modest amount of revenue and assists with
Minister.
budget repair.
The time has expired. Senator Chandler, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. How does the Minister explain the wording in the explanatory memorandum attached to the franking credit reforms that, and I quote, If an entity has never previously made a distribution, then the entity will not have a practice of making distributions.
Minister.
Well, I haven't got the explanatory memorandum before me, and I would want to see the context with which that was set. Like, I mean, you're opposed to the reform. You're trying to blow it into something that it isn't. No. And, well, I'll have a look at the explanatory memorandum and see the context with.
Minister, please resume your seat. Order. Order. Senator Wong. Senator Wong. Minister, please continue.
I'm happy to look at the explanatory memorandum. I don't have it before me right now, but I do support closing off a tax loophole and ensuring the integrity of our taxation system, something that senators in this place used to have an interest in. But we don't expect any of that from the no coalition that are going to say no to everything. No to absolutely everything, including sensible budget repair measures. You are budget vandals when you're in government, and you're going to continue on with the vandalism from opposition.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Chandler. Senator Hume, I have a senator on her feet, and you are calling out.
He's not allowed.
Senator Hume, I'm not inviting you to answer and argue back. I'm simply calling you to order. Senator Chandler.
There's no fun allowed.
Thank you, President. Just like superannuation, Labor repeatedly promised not to make any changes to franking credits if they won government. The Prime Minister stated that, and again I quote, "Labor has heard the message clearly and we will not be taking any changes to franking credits to the next election." Given Mr Albanese promised no changes to franking credits prior to the election and is now doing the opposite in government, why should any Australian trust Labor not to make further tax grabs on their savings or investments?
Order. Order. Senator Hughes, I've called you to order. And Senator McGrath. Minister, please answer the question.
Yes, thank you. Well, Senator Chandler's question is wrong. This change does not involve any change to franking credits or dividend imputations, and you know it. You know it. But it doesn't suit your narrative. It doesn't suit your narrative, so now we know that you're opposed to everything. You're also opposed to tax integrity. You're opposed to closing off tax loopholes. We can add that to the list of things that you don't agree with. So no to housing for women and children escaping domestic violence, no to jobs in the manufacturing sector, no to energy power bill relief, and now no to tax integrity and no to closing off tax loopholes. What do you stand for?
Minister,
absolutely
please
nothing.
resume your seat. Order on my right and left. Minister, please continue.
I think I've finished.
Senator Waters.
Thanks very much. President, can I first acknowledge it's International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day to all. And to Murray Coleman, who's no longer in the chamber but whose presence is felt and will be for many years. So today is International Women's Day, and we don't want cupcakes, we want equality. We want investment in women's safety, health and economic security. The government says it would love to do more if it wasn't for a tight budget.
Senator Waters, you haven't addressed your question.
You are so right. Maybe I needed to eat some of those cupcakes after all. My question is to the Minister representing herself, the Minister for Women, Minister Gallagher. Happy International Women's Day. The government says it would love to do more if it wasn't for a tight budget, yet you've refused to scrap the Stage 3 tax cuts that would give the balance sheet an extra $254 billion. The women's safety sector has said that $1 billion a year is what's needed to meet demand for frontline services, and so that no women or children have to be turned away when they seek help. Will the government commit to that level of funding to keep women safe?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Waters for the question and acknowledge her work and interests in the area of women's policy over a number of years. And specifically in response to the question she raises with me, we are very conscious of the need to continue to invest in the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Their Children and the services and systems that support the implementation of that plan, including for First Nations women through their own plan and action plan that sits alongside of that. We are, and we have, I think since coming to government, put our money where our mouth is on that and made some investments in October. I'm working with the Minister with responsibility for ending violence against women and children, or the Minister with responsibility for women's safety, and her Assistant Minister to look at further measures that we can support in the upcoming budget. They're currently, being considered by government, and we are aware of the calls from the sector around the additional money that's required. And these are some of the difficult decisions that I've been trying to school those opposite on, about how we make room for the services and supports we need in areas like ending violence against women and children, whilst they're arguing to maintain those high levels of concessionality for superannuation account holders with more than $3 million in it. I mean, these are the difficult choices before government. We're making those choices, but I can guarantee that we are continuing to focus on making sure that we can make an actual difference in the lives of women in this country, particularly vulnerable women and women who experience violence as part of their family, and how we support children
Minister.
through that as well.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Waters, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Paying superannuation on paid parental leave would cost around $200 million. Why won't the government prioritise closing the superannuation pay gap rather than turbocharging inequality by giving rich white men more in tax handouts?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister.
Thank you, President. And the Senator Waters raises a very important issue, which is the inequity that exists in the superannuation system for women. We know that women retire with less money than men, considerably less money than men. We know that the average super balance for women in this country, I can see those who were so interested in super a second ago all of a sudden aren't interested anymore, is $140,000. Well, I mean, OK, there we are. They're awake now. They're awake now.
Order.
$140,000 that the average female super balance is in this country. We don't hear you shouting about that.
Order.
There are
Order.
Sorry.
On both sides of the chamber.
We've made it clear we want to pay PPL, super on PPL. It's something that we are want to find room in the budget to do, and when we can afford it, we will do it.
Thank you. Senator Waters, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Homelessness and housing insecurity are at crisis levels, and the fastest growing cohort of people at risk of homelessness is women over the age of 45. It's not over 55 anymore, it's over 45 post-COVID. How many new affordable homes could be built with the $254 billion that you're intending and giving in tax cuts to rich white men?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Well, we agree that accommodation and a greater supply of social and affordable and crisis housing actually is required to address the needs of women across the country. We are negotiating with the states and territories under a new homelessness and housing agreement that's being led by Julie Collins, and we're from the other place, and we are also determined to get our Housing Australia Future Fund up. That fund, if established, would be an enduring and ongoing fund that allocates 30,000 social and affordable housing, of which a proportion would be dedicated to women, including women with children escaping violence. So I would urge people in this place, if they care about that, even if it's not exactly the model that they would choose to do, support it, because this is what we will use to get more housing on the ground for women in those categories.
Your time has expired. Senator Green.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. Noting that today is International Women's Day, could the Minister update the Senate on the situation facing women and girls in Iran and Afghanistan?
Minister Wong.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Green for her question and for her continued work for equality at home and beyond our shores. The UN has described the status of women and girls in Iran as that of second-class citizens. Discrimination is entrenched in Iranian law and practice. But the women of Iran have not been cowed. Instead, these courageous women and girls and their allies have been at the forefront of protests, shouting "Women, life, freedom." And the Australian government stands with them. We've called out Iran for its systematic discrimination against women and girls, most recently at the Human Rights Council last week. We've imposed sanctions on Iranians and Iranian entities involved in the violent crackdown of protesters. We stand too with the women of Afghanistan, where women's rights have been going backwards under the Taliban. The UN has found that the Taliban's treatment of women and girls may even amount to a crime against humanity. Women have been banned from attending university and girls from secondary education. Their movements and access to employment have been restricted. Sexual and gender-based violence have increased. So Australia is supporting the United Nations to provide health facilities and professionals to deliver reproductive health, counselling and protection services to vulnerable Afghan women and children. And last year, we supported the World Food Programme to provide food assistance to over 12 million women and girls. And Australia and others have supported our partners to deliver life-saving healthcare, shelter, education, nutrition, protection and cash assistance. There are many places in the world where we need to continue to work with the brave women and men who seek to improve the position of women and girls in societies where they are regrettably and sadly treated in these ways.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Green, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Could the Minister update the Senate on progress toward gender equality globally?
Minister Wong.
Unfortunately, it's not just Iran and Afghanistan. Women are facing setbacks around the world. The World Economic Forum has estimated that at the current rate of progress, it will take, wait for it, 132 years to reach full parity. 132 years on current trajectory for there to be full parity between men and women. And we also know that the crises of COVID-19, climate disruption and food shortages have hurt women and girls more. They have amplified existing inequalities, including gender equality. According to the WEF, we saw a generational loss of gains towards gender parity between 2020 and 21, a documented step backwards in rates of livelihoods and poverty. And Care Australia has estimated that 150 million more women than men are affected by food insecurity. We've seen documented declines in leadership and representation.
Thank you, Senator Wong. The time for answering has expired. Senator Green, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, what is the Albanese government doing to address global gender inequality and improve outcomes for women and girls?
Minister.
The developments I have outlined are troubling, I think, to everyone in this chamber, and they remind us how much work there is to be done. But the Albanese government is acting. In our development program, we have reinstated a performance target requiring 80% of Australia's investments effectively address requiring that 80% of Australia's investments effectively address gender equality in implementation. We have also introduced a mandatory requirement that our ODA investments over $3 million have a gender equality objective. And in 22-23, we will provide $65 million through the Gender Equality Fund to respond to the needs, interests and rights of diverse women and girls, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. We have a steadfast commitment to advancing gender equality and the human rights of women and girls at home, in our region and globally. As I've said before, we take the world as it is, but we have to work to shape it for the better.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Does the Albanese government support the establishment of a sovereign, independent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nation in Australia? Yes or no?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
I understand the motivation behind Senator Hanson's question, and you will know, of course, that the issue of sovereignty is something that First Nations people, including in this place, have asserted very clearly. And you would have heard Senator Stewart and others talk about the First Nations not having ceded their sovereignty. But if the question goes to two nations, we are the nation of Australia, and what we seek to do through the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Voice, Treaty and Truth, is to deal with the reality of our past, to reconcile and to move forward together through those three processes, mechanisms, reforms: a voice first, but also treaty and Makarrata.
Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Well, on that one, I don't feel I've really got an answer, whether it was a yes or a no. I understand what you're saying about the Uluru Statement. Does the Albanese government consider that all Australians, regardless of race, share sovereignty over Australia and its territories? Yes or no?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
With respect, Senator Hanson, I understand the motivation behind that question, and I would say to you, I think that the way that's phrased is a question that seeks to divide us. You and I both know we are all Australian citizens, but we do have unfinished business when it comes to our First Nations people. We do have a road that we have to walk as a country to bring us together, and I don't believe that road can be walked in good faith if we start to try and divide people in the way that I think your question is seeking to do, Senator. Now, you're entitled to your views, but what I would say to you is that we are all Australian citizens. Some of us come... We are all Australian...
Order, Senator Thorpe.
We are all Australian citizens, but there is work that needs to be done to recognise the place of our First Nations people in our constitution.
Thank you, Minister. The
and
time
in our
for
society.
answering has expired. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
Senator Wong, I've never tried to segregate or divide this nation. I've only called for equality ever since I came into Parliament. My question is, does the Albanese government support the principle that all Australians should be equally supported according to need, not race? Yes or no?
Minister Wong.
Senator Hanson, I think in order to ensure equality, that governments need to recognise that some people have not and are not treated equally, in great part because of their race. And you only need to look at the history of our First Nations people to recognise that. So yes, sometimes equality does require that we recognise the way in which race has impacted upon the equality of some of our peoples, and I do not think that is a bad thing. I think that is a principle of inclusion, not of separation and not of discrimination, but a principle of inclusion, acceptance and respect.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Davey.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. National Transport Commission data shows our truckies would pay an additional $2.6 billion in taxes and charges over 3 years under the proposed considered by Transport Minister Catherine King. Everything Australians grow on farm, or they make in a factory, or they buy in a shop, has to travel by truck. So will these extra taxes and charges add to inflation and make a difficult inflationary situation even worse?
Thank you, Senator Davey. Minister Gallagher.
I think Senator Davey is talking about the heavy vehicle road user charges. Is that correct? Yep. So any decision to increase heavy vehicle charges is a collective decision of all state and territory governments, and no decision has been taken yet. Those charges are intended to recover the heavy vehicle share of road expenditure by all governments, and the principle that heavy vehicle operators should continue their share towards the cost of roads is shared by government and industry. At the previous infrastructure and transport ministers' meetings, ministers agreed in principle across all governments to a 3-year charging cycle following calls from industry for longer-term certainty, but no final decision has been reached on these charges. In response to the specifics of the question as it relates to the Treasury portfolio as opposed to the infrastructure and transport portfolio, the senator asked whether any increase in these charges, of which a decision hasn't been made, would have an effect on inflation. I mean, that is one of the reasons why we have an economic plan which is designed to ensure that government, through our revenue and expenditure, is not adding to inflation in the economy. But these are not determined. Inflation is not determined by one charge in one part of the economy. It's the entire budget response that this government will be cautious and careful about, because we do not want to make the inflation challenge, which is real in this country and which is hurting households, stay around for any longer than is necessary to bring it back into the target rate and back into a more normalised setting. And that is exactly why we want to concentrate on our economic plan to ensure that we're doing what we need to do.
Expired. Senator Davey, first supplementary.
Thank you. I think I need to be a bit more specific. Has the government received any advice from the Departments of Finance or Treasury as to the inflationary impact of Labor's proposed truckie taxes, and whether they could add further pressure for even higher increases on interest rate? And if so, what is that advice?
Minister.
Well, as I said, this is not Labor's charge, if you want to call it that way. This is something that's negotiated across governments at the state and territory levels, of which I think there still is some Liberal governments in power. So I think it's disingenuous, as is your entire question time attack, really, about well, it is because you can't actually argue on the merits. So you try and dress it up into something that it's not. You try and dress it up into something that it's not. No decision has been taken as to what advice Treasury and Finance provide. I'm not going to go into advice. I can certainly say I have not been provided. Thank you.
Order.
I have not. I'm not aware of.
Senator McGrath. Senator McGrath. Senator Davies, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, given the potential impact on increasing truckie taxes on transporters and, more importantly, consumers and their grocery bills and national inflation, will the government rule out increasing taxes on Australian truckies, or will this become another one of Mr Albanese's broken promises, of which the number is mounting?
Thank you, Senator Davey. Minister Gallagher.
I should see if Senator McGrath would like to answer this on my behalf. Yeah, exactly.
Order.
Have a go.
Order.
Have a crack.
Order.
You must be so proud of yourself on International Women's Day.
Order.
Such a champion. Such a champion.
Order.
Good on you. Well done. Opposition life is hard.
Minister
it's
Gallagher.
hard.
Minister
it's
Gallagher,
hard, James.
please
It's
resume
hard.
your seat. Order across the chamber. Order across the chamber. Senator Wong, I have a senator on her feet. Senator Davies.
Point of order, relevance. My question had nothing to do with
Senator
International
Davies.
Women's Day, and I'd like her to stick to the question.
Senator Davies, the minister has just started and she is being relevant. I am more interested at this point. Order! In there being order across the chamber so that I might hear the rest of her answer. Minister.
Oh. Well, as the senator knows, this is a matter that's actually at the decision-making table of infrastructure and transport ministers who have not made a decision. It is across government, state and territory governments involved in discussions with the Commonwealth. So I think it's appropriately resolved at that level, and perhaps you could lobby your colleagues, if you're so concerned about it, about the position they might be taking.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Attorney-General. This week, Senator Dodson, a former Commissioner of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, has called out your government, his own government, over its inaction on implementing the recommendations put forward by the Royal Commission over 30 years ago. Can you tell me if the government is going to ensure full implementation of all 339 of the recommendations?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Thorpe, for your question. I agree, and I would like to think that everyone in this chamber would agree with Senator Dodson that 32 years after the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, that rates of incarcerated First Nations adults and youth are unacceptable, and that the rates of deaths in custody among First Nations adults and youth are unacceptable. There are many members of our government and across the chamber who have said before, and will, I'm sure, keep saying, that First Nations incarceration rates and deaths in custody are a national shame. And coming into government, it was clear, unfortunately, that for the last 9 years, First Nations justice was just not a priority for the former government. And that's why last year the Attorney-General worked closely with his colleague, Ms Burney, to form a First Nations Justice Task Force with officials from the Attorney-General's Department and the National Indigenous Australians Agency.
Senator Watt, please resume your seat. Senator Thorpe, I'd in future wait to be noticed rather than calling out. Senator Thorpe. Senator Thorpe, I've called you to order. It's not okay to argue back.
Okay.
You have a point of order?
Thank you.
Thank you.
On relevance?
Thank you. The Minister is being relevant to your question, so please resume your seat. Minister, please continue. Senator Thorpe, I've asked you to resume your seat.
Thank you, President. As I was saying...
Minister, please resume your seat. Minister...
Relevance. The question is, when are you going to implement the recommendations in full?
Senator Thorpe, I did, on your first point, say that the Minister was being relevant, and I'm going to say on your second point the Minister is being relevant. Senator Birmingham.
President, on the point of order and the handling of points of order, this is a seemingly new practice to rule before a senator has even had a chance to put their case. On Senator Thorpe's first point of order, she had no more than got the word relevance out of her mouth than you ruled against her without hearing the basis upon which she was claiming a relevancy of the answer. I would, President, invite you to reflect upon that and to consider in terms of your handling of points of order that I understand where they are repetitious or take approaches that are disorderly in the chamber. But in this case, a first point of order from a senator on a question I think deserves the opportunity for that senator to have had the chance to make their point.
Senator Wong, I'm going to respond and then I'll come to you. Senator Birmingham, as I've pointed out many times on points of order, I have senators stand and make statements and repeat questions and go to great lengths, which is unnecessary. In Senator Thorpe's case, and my apologies if she hadn't finished her answer, I understood she had finished her answer, and so I ruled. I'm going to go to Senator Wong.
Thank you.
Order.
Yeah, if I could perhaps make a couple of points in relation to your ruling. The first is, in fact, it was Senator Ryan who first started to truncate the submissions on points of order because his view was that a number of us, and I may have been one of those, made too many contributions on our feed on points of order. So I was cut off on a number of occasions by Senator Ryan as the President. being of the view that he had already come to a view about the substance of the point of order. I have to say, Senator, I thought you were saying the word and then sitting down. So we have no objection if the President wishes to call you to make your submission, if you wish to do that.
Senator Thorpe, on your first point of order, if you hadn't finished, I invite you to make a short statement about your point of order.
My point of order, thank you for the indulgence, President. My point of order was based on relevance because the question was relating to if the government is going to implement 339 recommendations that will save Black lives today.
Yep, thank you, Senator Thorpe. And you went to statements that Senator Dodson had made and in general about the Royal Commission and other matters. So I do believe the Minister was being relevant. I'm going to invite him to continue. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, President. And as I was saying, last year, in recognition that there is still more work to do in implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission, the Attorney-General established a First Nations Justice Task Force with the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Ms Burney, and that contains officials from both of their agencies, and that task force is leading the design, coordination and implementation of this government's historic $99 million First Nations Justice Package. That includes unprecedented Commonwealth investment in justice reinvestment, unprecedented Commonwealth investment in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services to provide culturally appropriate legal assistance in coronial inquiries, and a commitment to real-time reporting of deaths in custody. The government is also working closely with states and territories on a proposal to raise the minimum age of criminal responsibility. So we acknowledge there's more work to be done in this space. It needs to happen and we're getting on with it.
Thank you, Minister. Your time for answering has expired. Senator Thorpe, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Minister, for your response. What will your government do to support your own special envoy, the father of reconciliation, on taking urgent action on the implementation of the recommendations? And what time frame are you operating under, given it's been over 30 years already?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Thorpe, and thank you for drawing attention to someone that I know we are all extremely proud to have within our ranks, Senator Dodson. Not just the father of reconciliation, but of course a commissioner in the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. In fact, I think on a personal level, that's probably where I first became aware of Senator Dodson's incredible advocacy on behalf of our First Peoples. Senator Dodson has been a lifelong advocate for and a leader amongst First Nations Australians, and I know that he's making a very strong contribution as a member of the Albanese government to deliver on those recommendations and to improve the position of First Nations people in our country every single day. Now, Senator Dodson, I've come to regard as a friend. I've learned a lot from him, and I know that he's someone of incredible goodwill and puts the needs and rights of First Nations people at the centre of what he does every single day. We can all learn from him and we can all take up his call to do more in this area.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Your time has expired. Senator Thorpe, are you ready to ask a second supplementary?
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, President. One of the key factors impacting deaths in custody in access to healthcare in prisons, by making Medicare in prisons available, First Nations people could access Aboriginal health checks and culturally safe healthcare. Years ago, Labor made a policy commitment to Medicare in prisons. When are you going to make this a reality?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Minister Watt.
Well, of course, thank you, Senator Thorpe. Well, of course, our government is doing everything we possibly can to rebuild Medicare after years of destruction, whether that be in the general community or in prisons. We have been on the record on many occasions saying that after nearly 10 years of Liberal National Party government, Medicare is broken. And that applies whether we're talking about people seeking to go to a GP in their community or whether we're talking about in prisons as well. These are important issues to make sure that all prisoners, and in particular First Nations prisoners, are given the unacceptably high rates of both incarceration and deaths in custody get the health treatment that they deserve. And I have every confidence that through the leadership of people like Senator Dodson, Senator McCarthy, Ms Burney, Ms Scrimgeour and many others, that this government will be doing more in this space than any government we've ever seen.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry and Science, Senator Watt. What is the Australian government doing to transform Australian industry, and why is it important to improve Australia's sovereign capability?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill, who I know is a very strong supporter of the manufacturing industry, particularly in her state of New South Wales. A key commitment that the Albanese government made at the election was to rebuild Australian manufacturing after 10 years of neglect and turning our back on manufacturing under the former government. The Albanese government committed to build a future made in Australia, and the National Reconstruction Fund is a key part of doing that. The National Reconstruction Fund will provide finance to co-invest with industry, to drive investments to grow advanced manufacturing and support businesses to innovate and create more good blue-collar jobs right across our country. The National Reconstruction Fund will also leverage Australia's natural and competitive strengths and shore up our supply chains. We saw through the pandemic how our supply chains were under huge pressure. Products we expected were hard to get. Across a range of products, our supermarkets and pharmacies couldn't get us what we needed. We couldn't get ventilators, we couldn't get PPE, and who can forget going to supermarkets with those empty shelves when we couldn't get the products that we needed. Now, that was when some of us took note of the fact that our manufacturing industry had been run down as a country, and some of us took note that we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and make more things here. And that's when the seed for the National Reconstruction Fund was planted. We know you hate manufacturing. We know you sent the car industry offshore. We know you don't like manufacturing jobs, but you finally have a chance to repent and get behind the National Reconstruction Fund. The Albanese government, Labor government, is committed to building resilient supply chains and national sovereign capability to reinforce the prosperity, security and well-being of the nation. The National Reconstruction Fund will attract investment, it will help to grow the Australian economy and, most importantly, it will deliver good quality manufacturing jobs across our country.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you very much. Minister, how will the National Reconstruction Fund support manufacturing businesses and create manufacturing jobs, particularly in regional Australia?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thanks again, Senator O'Neill. When we think about manufacturing, we think about regional Australia. Places like Gladstone, the Hunter Valley, Whyalla, Geelong, Bell Bay and so much of Western Australia. Some of us get off the North Shore every now and then, Senator Hughes, and some of us get out into regional Australia and see what's going on in the manufacturing industry. And that's because regional Australia is a manufacturing powerhouse, and the National Reconstruction Fund will make our regions even stronger. A number of the National Reconstruction Fund priority areas. We're back in the North Shore.
Senator Watt. Order. Order. Senator Hughes, I haven't called you yet. Order. Order. I have a senator on her feet. Senator Hughes.
I would like to ask Senator Watt to withdraw the commentary that he's making in deriding the North Shore of Sydney. Not that I live on the North Shore of Sydney, and I have got off the North Shore of Sydney many times. Unlike you, I lived in...
Senator Hughes. Senator Watt, I haven't called you either. I am going to remind you it's not appropriate to single out particular senators, and I'm going to ask you to direct your comments to the chair. Please continue.
I withdraw. As I say, the National Reconstruction Fund priorities have a very strong regional presence, sectors like resources, agriculture, defence and renewables. And it's no wonder, therefore, that so many industry groups with a large regional presence are backing the National Reconstruction Fund. To begin with, an organisation I've heard of called the National Farmers Federation, who, when Labor announced this commitment, talked about the opportunities for a renaissance of regional manufacturing. I would encourage all senators, particularly a little group over there, to maybe listen to groups like the NFF.
Senator Watt, your time has expired. Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Are there, Minister, are there any threats to delivering this support for Australian manufacturers?
Minister Watt.
Well, Senator O'Neill, it is my melancholy duty to say that there are threats to this proposal. And while the resources and agriculture industry are saying yes, yes, yes to the National Reconstruction Fund, those opposite keep saying no, no, no. And these are industries that the National Party of all groups are supposed to be champions for in this place. And I note, I take the interjection from Senator Mackenzie that it's a coalition, and perhaps that suggests that maybe there's not full agreement between the Liberals and the Nationals on this point. That would be very interesting to explore. And I note that there, in the past, National Senator Matt Canavan has acknowledged the past 20 years of federal governments, including his own, have dropped the ball on Australian manufacturing. He said that they've dropped the ball, but there's been a real renaissance in manufacturing in Australia. Well, Senator Canavan and all the Nationals, I invite you to join with us. I invite you to join with us with the National Farmers Federation, with the Australian Aluminium Council to get behind regional manufacturing. There's an opportunity to stand up to the North Shore Liberals and back regional Australia.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Little.
Thank you, President. Now, this question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. Minister, your government went to the election with a promise to prioritise Australians' access to healthcare and reduce the cost of medicines. Given this promise, why has the Albanese Labor government decided to remove an innovative, life-changing form of insulin, Fiasp, from the PBS, sending the price soaring to unaffordable levels for 15,000 Australians with diabetes who rely on it?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Little for the question. Senator Little is right in her question about our commitments to improving access to healthcare and improving Medicare, dealing with the crisis in primary care. It's another one of those issues that was left to us after 10 years of neglect and dysfunction from those opposite, that it was harder to see a doctor and more expensive to access healthcare, and we are doing everything we can to reduce the price of medicines. In fact, our change that came in on the 1st of January has reduced the price of most pharmaceuticals from $42 a script to $30 a script. In relation to the insulin medication that Senator Little has raised, this was a decision of PBAC, which is an independent expert body which advises the Australian government about the listings of medicine and comprises experts in the field of medicine, health, economics, social policy, health technology and pharmacology. The Health Minister was made aware on the 22nd of February of the company's intention to delist this medication from PBS from the 1st of April. We understand that this is causing concern for people who...
Senator Ruston.
We understand that this is causing concern for people who are using that medication, and the Minister has asked his department to work with the company to look at resolving the matter. The PBAC has advised that due to the availability of other medicines, the removal of this particular medication from PBS will not result in unmet clinical need.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering this question has expired. Senator Little, first supplementary.
Thank you.
Senator
Minister
Ruston, just a moment, Senator Little. You've got one of your own senators on her feet, ready to ask a question. Senator Little, please continue.
Thank you. Minister, your government went to the election with a promise to prioritise Australians' access to healthcare and make it easier to see a doctor, which is particularly important for rural, regional and remote Australians. Given that promise, why has the Albanese Labor government ripped GPs out of rural, regional and remote Australia by changing the distribution priority areas for overseas trained doctors, making it harder for millions of Australians in those areas to see a doctor?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Well, with respect, Senator Little's question is not correct to say that Labor has ripped GPs out of areas. That is just simply not true. And honestly, to have the interjections from Senator Ruston, who was a member of the ERC that sat there and watched while Medicare fell into crisis and areas like workforce were not dealt with, while it took delays through the immigration system for health professionals to come here, that we are now fixing and cleaning up. The interjections are outrageous. Honestly, it's like she hopes that everyone has amnesia from 9 years of failure. Well, we remember, Senator Ruston, what you did to the healthcare system in this country, and Minister Butler and this government are fixing it. We're fixing it bit by bit, with workforce, with difficult decisions, with looking at where we can make investments, to looking at how we can fix primary care and ensure that people in regional and rural Australia have access.
Senator Little, second supplementary.
Minister, another promise was to prioritise Australians' access to healthcare and protect Medicare. Given that promise, why has the Albanese Labor government slashed Medicare subsidised mental health support in half, removing access to psychology sessions from the Australians who need the most support? Why are you breaking promises on medicines, country doctors, Medicare and mental health?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
The question is wrong on all three issues. It is. It's wrong. But we get what you're doing. We get what you're doing. OK. You ask incorrect questions and then I get to answer them, which is what I'm doing now. But we are the party of Medicare. We are the party that built Medicare. We are the party that will save it. We are the party that will make investments in healthcare. We will make medicines cheaper. We will have new models of care like urgent care centres. Are you opposed to those as well? Is the Coalition opposed to those as well? We will make it easier to bring in workforce that we so desperately need in this country that you had failed to do, that left to millions waiting, visas waiting to come into the country. The backlog we're fixing to try and ensure that the people that Senator Little raises, the people living in rural and regional Australia, actually get the healthcare they deserve, because it declined so badly under your watch.
That's
exactly
Minister.
what we're
Your
doing.
time has expired. Senator Wong.
I ask that further questions be placed on note.